The wedding processions that wound through Rome's marble streets in 38 CE didn't end at temple altars. They ended at the gates of the imperial palace, where brides disappeared and returned hours later, changed in ways their new husbands would spend lifetimes trying to forget. Under Caligula's reign, Rome's most sacred institutions, marriage, priesthood, parenthood, became hunting grounds for calculated violations. Vestal virgins, untouchable for 7 centuries, were defiled in public forums. Senators' children entered imperial schools and emerged as something unrecognizable. Families received invoices for atrocities committed against their own daughters, itemized like grain shipments. This wasn't the madness of a tyrant losing control. It was the efficiency of an emperor who discovered that sexuality, when weaponized through bureaucracy, could crush resistance more effectively than any army. Every violation was catalogued in the Registry of Divine Encounters. Every victim was assigned a classification code. Every horror had a precedent, a procedure, and a price. 5 specific practices emerged from this system, each more devastating than the last. And through them, the civilization that had conquered the known world found itself conquered from within, not by foreign enemies, but by a machine of organized depravity that turned Rome's nobility into accomplices of their own destruction. To understand how an empire built on law and honor descended into this nightmare, we need to go back to the moment when a young man with a bright smile was crowned as Rome's salvation. But before we descend into this darkness, help this channel continue exploring history's most disturbing truths. Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these deep dives into what really happened behind the official histories. When Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus took power in 37 CE, Rome literally celebrated for 100 days straight. This wasn't some unpopular tyrant seizing control. This was their chosen hero. The grandson of Augustus, the son of Germanicus, Rome's most beloved general. The little boy soldiers had nicknamed Caligula, Little Boot, because he'd grown up in military camps wearing miniature legionary sandals. His first 8 months were everything Rome had prayed for. He freed political prisoners Tiberius had locked away. He cut taxes. He threw gladiatorial games that lasted for weeks. He funded massive construction projects that put thousands to work. The Senate called him our son, our hope. Mothers named their newborn sons after him. Even the notoriously cynical philosopher Seneca praised his speeches as golden words from a golden throat. Rome had waited so long for this moment. After the paranoid, isolated rule of Tiberius, Caligula seemed like divine intervention. He walked among the people. He listened to complaints. He laughed at jokes. He was everything an emperor should be. And then, in October of 37 CE, everything changed. The fever struck suddenly. For 13 days, Caligula burned. Palace physicians documented symptoms that modern doctors would recognize as encephalitis. Violent convulsions that required 6 men to restrain him, hallucinations where he claimed to wrestle with Jupiter himself, stretches of unconsciousness so deep they thought he'd died. Rome held its breath. Citizens pledged their own lives to the gods in exchange for his recovery. The Senate ordered daily sacrifices at every temple. For nearly 2 weeks, the empire's fate hung by a thread. When he finally opened his eyes on the 14th day, his first words sent chills through everyone present. The gods showed me who I really am. Court observers noted immediate changes. His pupils remained unnaturally dilated, even in bright sunlight. He stopped sleeping in patterns, wandering the palace halls at 3 a.m., dictating laws to empty rooms. He ordered mirrors removed from his chambers, claiming his reflection was too bright for mortal eyes to witness. Within 3 weeks, he commanded architects to begin construction on a new wing of the palace. He called it the Temple of Living Divinity. The builders who saw the blueprints understood immediately this wasn't a temple. The rooms were designed like cells, the doors locked from the outside. and the central chamber had drainage channels built into the floor. What emerged wasn't random cruelty. It was something far more dangerous. Caligula had discovered that power combined with sexual violence could achieve what military might never could, the complete psychological subjugation of Rome's elite. His personal secretary, a former slave named Callistus, kept what he euphemistically titled the Registry of Divine Encounters. It was essentially a database, names cross-referenced with ages, social rankings, family connections, and what Callistus called utility classifications. 5 distinct programs emerged from this registry, each more systematic than the last. For over 700 years, the Vestal Virgins had been Rome's most sacred institution. 6 priestesses chosen as children, sworn to 30 years of chastity, keepers of the eternal flame that symbolized Rome's survival. Touching a Vestal was punishable by being buried alive. Their status was absolute, untouchable. Caligula shattered that protection in a single night. In front of the Senate, he summoned the eldest Vestal, Rubria, and declared that the gods had commanded him to renew her sacred purity through union with divinity, meaning himself. The violation occurred in the temple of Vesta itself, witnessed by senators forced to attend and forbidden from looking away. But the true horror wasn't the act, it was the aftermath. The Senate was compelled to vote that it had been a religious ceremony, not a crime. Priests were ordered to bless it, and Rubria, broken beyond repair, was returned to her duties as if nothing had happened. When she attempted suicide 2 weeks later, imperial physicians revived her, and she was punished for trying to escape divine service. 4 more Vestals followed over the next year. The message was clear. Nothing in Rome was sacred anymore. If the Vestals could fall, anyone could. Caligula developed what he called marital corrections, a system that targeted newly married couples. The process was bureaucratic in its efficiency. When a patrician family registered a marriage with the state, the bride's name entered a lottery. Selected women received a summons requiring them to appear at the palace for imperial blessing. What happened next was calculated humiliation. The husband was forced to grant Caligula a temporary divorce, transferring all marital rights for a period of 1 to 3 nights. During this time, the emperor would instruct the wife in what he called divine marital duties. The husband was then required to remarry her in a second ceremony, publicly declaring her improved by imperial guidance. The genius of this system was its legal framework. Divorce and remarriage were legitimate Roman practices. By forcing families to use proper legal channels, Caligula made them complicit. Fathers signed documents. Priests performed ceremonies. Everything was documented, witnessed, sealed with official stamps. Men who refused found their property confiscated, their sons conscripted to dangerous frontier posts, their daughters added to the registry with higher priority. The system didn't need universal compliance, just enough examples to terrify everyone else into obedience. Perhaps the most publicly humiliating practice was what Romans whispered about as the procession interceptions. Caligula stationed informants throughout the city to report wedding dates. On the chosen day, as the bride's procession wound through the streets toward her new husband's home, Praetorian guards would intercept it. The bride would be escorted to the palace while the groom and wedding guests were forced to wait. Hours later, sometimes a full day later, she would be returned, but there was a price. The groom had to bid against other suitors, some real, some plants, to reclaim his own bride. The auction wasn't about money. It was about forcing men to publicly declare the value of their humiliation. Prices varied based on how much the bride had resisted. Women who fought back cost more, women who remained silent cost less. The cruelest twist, the money went directly into the imperial treasury as voluntary wedding gifts. The families couldn't claim they'd been robbed, officially they'd made donations. Wedding processions began traveling at night unannounced through back streets, but informants were everywhere. During Caligula's 4-year reign, historians estimate over 200 weddings were intercepted. The practice became so common that marriage rates among the nobility plummeted. Why marry when the ceremony itself had become a trap? The fourth practice targeted family structures themselves. Caligula became obsessed with what he called divine bloodline purification. He issued an edict requiring all senatorial families to submit complete genealogies identifying relatives within 3 degrees of kinship: siblings, cousins, nieces, nephews. These weren't academic documents, they were shopping lists. Caligula would select pairs from within the same family and command them to produce children together, claiming that concentrated noble blood created offspring of enhanced divine receptivity, children he could raise as loyal servants of the throne. The policy started with his own sister, Drusilla. When she died suddenly in 38 CE, possibly from one of the forced pregnancies, Caligula's grief manifested as rage. He declared that her death proved ordinary bodies couldn't contain divine offspring, so he needed to find worthier vessels. His remaining sisters, Agrippina and Julia Livilla, were next, then cousins. Then he expanded the mandate empire-wide. Fathers were ordered to arrange unions between their own children. Mothers had to witness. Family members who produced children from these unions received tax benefits and political appointments. Those who refused faced charges of treason against divine will. The Senate voted to make intra-family unions legal when sanctioned by imperial decree. Dozens of children were born from this program. They were immediately removed from their birth families and raised in an imperial compound, trained from infancy in what Caligula called pure loyalty. Loyalty that superseded all family bonds, all traditional morality, all human connection except to the emperor himself. The fifth and most insidious practice was the establishment of what was officially called the Academy for Noble Youth. Parents were told their children, ages 10 to 16, would receive elite education in rhetoric, philosophy, and statecraft directly under imperial supervision. It sounded like an honor. Families competed for placement. The reality was systematic conditioning. Children lived in dormitories within the palace complex. They were separated by gender initially, but those divisions dissolved quickly. The curriculum had nothing to do with traditional education. Instead, it focused on what instructors called loyalty exercises, scenarios designed to break family bonds and rebuild identity around submission to imperial will. Letters home were censored and often forged. Parents who demanded visits were told their children were thriving and that interference would result in expulsion. A mark of shame no family wanted. When students did return home for brief visits, they seemed changed. Quieter, more compliant. Their eyes had that same hollow quality observers noted in the emperor himself. The most disturbing reports came from servants who worked in the dormitories. They described nighttime rituals where students were paired randomly and forced to participate in acts designed to erase shame, destroy innocence, and create mutual blackmail. Everyone knew everyone else's secrets. No one could expose the system without exposing themselves. Over 3 years, more than 300 children cycled through the academy. Those who graduated were placed in positions throughout the government: junior administrators, scribes, guards. They formed a network of loyalists who owed everything to Caligula and nothing to traditional Roman values. They were the emperor's eyes and ears in every patrician household, every Senate meeting, every private conversation. The academy was Caligula's most brilliant innovation. He wasn't just controlling Rome's present. He was engineering its future. What made these 5 practices so devastating wasn't just their cruelty. It was their systematic nature. Each had paperwork, each followed protocols. Each created a web of complicity that trapped everyone who touched it. The Registry of Divine Encounters swelled to thousands of entries. Every violation had a classification code, a timestamp, a list of witnesses, a record of payment. Physicians filed medical reports after examinations. Scribes logged schedules. Accountants balanced the books, noting that divine service contributions had become one of the treasury's largest revenue sources. An entire shadow economy grew around the palace's needs. Vendors sold cosmetics to cover bruises. Apothecaries provided tonics to prevent pregnancies or end them quietly. Tutors taught daughters of nobles how to appear compliant while protecting their minds. Doctors specialized in repairing physical damage. Everyone profited. Everyone became complicit. The Senate never formally protested. How could they? Their own wives and daughters were in the registry. Their sons had graduated from the academy. They'd signed the documents, attended the ceremonies, collected the tax benefits. They'd watched Caligula transform Roman law to legalize the illegal, sanctify the profane, and bureaucratize the unthinkable. And perhaps that was the point. Caligula didn't want rebellion. He wanted collaboration. Because once everyone had participated, everyone had a reason to stay silent. On January 24, 41 CE, a group of Praetorian guards led by Officer Cassius Chaerea finally ended it. They cornered Caligula in an underground passage beneath the palace and stabbed him repeatedly. Over 30 wounds, including a deliberate strike to his genitals, a symbolic reversal of his crimes. His wife Caesonia was murdered hours later. His infant daughter Julia Drusilla was killed by a soldier who smashed her head against a wall. The conspirators wanted to erase the bloodline entirely. The new emperor Claudius ordered damnatio memoriae, memory erasure. Statues toppled, inscriptions chiseled away, official records burned. The 5 practices were never formally acknowledged in any surviving imperial history. But the registry survived, fragments of it anyway, discovered centuries later in sealed chambers beneath the Palatine Hill. The lists of names, the classification codes, the clinical descriptions of violations presented as administrative reports. The children from the academy grew up and spread throughout the empire, many never knowing their true origins. The women who survived carried their trauma in silence. Roman culture had no language for what they'd endured. Families who'd participated lived with guilt that poisoned generations. Caligula ruled for less than 4 years. But his legacy demonstrated something that still haunts us. When power faces no limits, when systems replace conscience, when bureaucracy sanitizes atrocity, entire civilizations can be turned into accomplices of their own moral destruction. The 5 practices didn't die with the emperor. They became a blueprint, proof that evil, when organized, documented, and systematized, can survive its architect. Some manuals once written are never truly gone. If this exploration of history's darkest chapters disturbed you, that's exactly why this content matters. Real history isn't comfortable. It's not supposed to be. Hit that subscribe button for more uncomfortable truths that need to be remembered.